Hello, thank you so much for joining us today. We're here at the Estonian Ambassador's Residency in London. I'm incredibly privileged to be chairing a panel to discuss AI and GovTech, what works, what fails, and why. My name is Grace Smith, and I am a principal consultant in Nortal's UK team. I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists to you all. So we have Jennifer Brooker, who is Chief Data Architect for the Government Digital Service in the UK government. Stuart Coleman, who is the Director of Consultancy and Learning at the Open Data Institute, and Dr. Elena Sügis, who is a Senior Data Scientist with us at Nortal, based in Estonia. So I would like to briefly set out the structure of the session today. We're going to begin with a short presentation from each panelist on their area of expertise within AI, data, and GovTech. And then we're going to close the session with a more open and free-flowing discussion around some of the priorities and work they're currently undergoing, which I think is going to be absolutely fascinating. We also are very keen for you to be able to participate in the discussion, so please do contribute any questions directly to any of our panelists in the Q&A in the web chat, and we will endeavour to get those responses back to you as soon as possible. So without further ado, let's kick off today's session. So I would like to start by providing a little bit of context, not only in kind of GovTech AI, but the current state of play in the UK. For those of us who are interested in AI and working in this space, it feels like the rate of change is unprecedented and incredibly rapid. And there are AI use cases that we couldn't have even fathomed weeks ago that are now coming into adoption across all different sectors, whether it's AI voice use cases where you can have a conversation with a chatbot that sounds almost like it could be a human, or AI agents that are able to seemingly carry out tasks independently from humans. It feels like the sky is the limit. And this presents a very unique challenge for the public sector. There is so much technology to embrace and drive innovation and efficiency. But particularly for those of us here, across all of our roles, we are thinking about the question of how to build digital societies. It's about what we need to do around the technology, the data infrastructure, the very nature of how you build a society, insurance policies, protections for citizens, protections for those working on the front line. The future of what that is going to look like is uncertain. And that brings exciting elements, but also things that can be quite frightening as well. So that is the kind of framing of the conversation we wanted to have today. We wanted to dive into different elements of what the future of government is going to look like. And it's fantastic to have Jennifer here to talk specifically about the current priorities and challenges at the heart of UK government. But we also have Stuart, who has worked across so many different key areas of that. And I think we'll be able to provide a really interesting perspective on how we actually get the data foundations right. As well as Elena, who is one of our leading data scientists at Nortal, and I think will provide some really fascinating insights into some of the projects that she is working on. So I suppose if I close on two key questions, the first would be, what are the structural barriers that we are facing as societies that we need to overcome to meet some of the UK government's key ambitions? But secondly, how do we actually bring that to the front line of public service delivery and ultimately to citizens? I would now be honoured to pass over to Jennifer, who is going to talk to us a little bit about all of the exciting work happening in UK government and her view on the priorities as we move forward.
I'm going to take us probably down slightly a darker road I'm going to go with for the first part of this, to just talk about where we are at. So the State of Digital Government Review, that set out, it had a whole cross-government view on where are we at? How do we make AI, how do we make data, how do we make technology really work for government? There's probably 5 key parts to that I'll pick out, which is siloed data. So we know there's inconsistent quality across departments. We know getting access to the data is still difficult despite all of the work that we've done. We've got legacy infrastructure that also has barriers to not just access to data, but also making use of new technologies. And we know that there will still be long time scales for refresh of that infrastructure. The skills gap, so the insufficient kind of AI expertise alone, let alone the kind of digital skills gap as well. We have a trust deficit, so public skepticism around like use of data, concerns around bias that AI brings, and also the challenge of taking all of those great proof of concepts, but also how do we kind of scale AI? So I think that kind of sets out the realities of where government is. The bit that I will point to, though, is I kind of started to title this slide Making a Difference, but actually it feels like we are trying to be different. So government is trying to be different in order to address those challenges. So we've got our Secretary of State for DCIT, who is standing up and really talking about these issues, who's making use of the technology himself. His recent release of his ChatGPT prompts, just really showcasing that kind of use of technology. We've got the blueprint for digital government that really sets out a whole set of reforms and ambitions around how we actually start to address some of those issues that the State of Digital Review set out. The AI Opportunities Action Plan, which in itself covers a broad range of not just government, but also the broader industry and actions that are needed for the whole UK to make best use of AI to drive things like economic growth. And things like having the words data in a manifesto, like unprecedented and never seen before. The time I remember is very much previous to this, when that was so important, was around open data, and you had Tim Berners-Lee kind of standing up. Like, we've got some of those moments now. And so as an organisation, as a government, we're committing to things like a national data library, systemic reform around data, expanding our kind of sovereign compute capacity, like so investing in that infrastructure of the future. Expanding the digital and data profession. So last Thursday, government announced the kind of increase in the digital and data skills to almost kind of doubling effectively the kind of profession. We do a lot of work in our organisations around trust and how do we create the ethical and trust frameworks for not just AI, but use of data and use of people's personal data. And the incubating of AI products and scaling those into kind of cross-government services. So that's a real kind of commitment within our blueprint that teams in GDS now bringing in the incubator for AI. So I think we've really set ourselves up in GDS to really like help and support all of those, but actually more broadly, organisations across government are really kind of embracing this. Okay, how can we be different? And I think that's where we see some of the success stories. So at the moment, these people are doing it almost despite the kind of system they're in. And I think that's the push, is how do we change it so that they do it because of the system that they're in. My favourites are Department for Education's AI content store. So like, how do we get the information that is just there really simply in documents and stores across government to create something to really showcase for EdTech sector, how do they make use of this to drive, in education, better outcomes for our pupils, less time spent marking and all of those kind of great things. And definitely closer to home, gov.uk chat, which is in kind of beta at the moment, really trying to understand how do we change the channels with which that we interact with citizens. And I think there's kind of real two things with AI. It's like, how can that make lives better for our citizens? But also, how can we use it to be more efficient within government? And things like our AI playbook, civil service data challenge, some of those challenge participants were pitching use of data and AI to solve real problems, such as prison overcrowding. and the algorithmic transparency recording standard, which is never easy to say. So ATRS, which is trying to bring that transparency of if a decision is being made about a person, how can they understand the algorithms that are doing that? So those kind of success stories, and how do we reform the system in order to make those just part of the everyday?
Thank you very much, Jennifer. That was incredibly interesting, and I'm sure we will return to quite a lot of the issues you've raised in our discussion later. I also note that you mentioned Tim Berners-Lee in your presentation, which leads nicely onto Stuart and the ODI. Stuart, really interested to hear your perspective on how we get data right, which is obviously such an important part of any AI initiatives moving forward.
Grace, thank you very much for the introduction. And Jenny, thank you for your insights into what's going on in government and through government digital services lens. Clearly been very busy, and I like the ambition of what I'm seeing coming from within GDS. Of course, we at the Open Data Institute are from government, having had the privilege of early funding just over a decade ago when we were set up, and very much working in the area of open data. That moment, I guess, 11, almost 12 years ago now, when governments around the world worked together in a coalition, wouldn't that be great, to get behind publishing, releasing and opening up data. But in the years since, there's a lot more focus from us at the Institute, and particularly as we've moved to become wholly independent of government, at working at the intersection of sharing data and considering how data sets can and should be used in AI systems. And I think there's some big questions emerging as we move through this unprecedented rate of change that Grace talked about. So it might sound rather obvious that you can't do AI without data, but I think it's worth unpacking that a bit more. And obviously, we've got various bits of research that you can look at and encourage audience and participants to do so. We have a particular research program at the Institute called Data-Centric AI, of which there are inputs in there. But I think it's worth considering that when you think about the data that's in AI systems, it's not always immediately just kind of ones and zeros. It can be images, it can be locations, it can be audio, it can be video, all sorts of different formats. And one of the things that we see, particularly through my lens, and one of the lenses that I focus on is training and education, is a huge amount of time and effort is spent on data before it can even become ready for use in AI. And in fact, tackling that challenge and trying to make that more efficient, more trustworthy, is a real opportunity for government. Because ultimately, government could and should be a fantastic provider of data to AI. And I suppose the real shame, in my view at the moment, is that there's so much focus on the models. You know, who's got the best model? And we've seen that actually smaller models can do pretty amazing things. And in fact, increasingly research is showing smaller models with access to really high quality data can do great things. And I'm hoping that there's going to be some demonstrations of that in the months and years ahead from government. Certainly when it comes to engaging and communicating with government, although I'm delighted to see initiatives like the Algorithmic Transparency Index trying to safeguard the use of algorithms to make sure that we don't see harms propagated against people in particularly acute decision-making areas of government like benefits or health. So in a nutshell, at the Institute, we're really, really interested and focused on three aspects of data-centric AI. One is, how do you make data AI ready so that it can be used with predominantly machine learning, although of course there are other forms of AI. How do we make AI data accessible and usable? Because if we can make that more possible, it will hopefully in time reduce the workloads on civil servants who are absolutely consumed by just trying to improve digital services, as teams like Jenny's working on day in, day out. And lastly, how can we make sure that AI systems, once they're in production, are using data responsibly? If we can get those three things dealt with, then I think there's a real opportunity to innovate in and around government service delivery. So We had Grace mention earlier, there's a bunch of really good commitments to advancing AI and data in government. And in fact, the industrial strategy that was one of the first things that the new government talked about and published their report in, I believe if you search for data, as Jenny said, it's great that data as a term is featuring more and more in these documents and manifestos and policies. I think it's in the document something like 38, 39 times. And even the words data infrastructure are starting to emerge. So getting government to think more about data like that is fantastic. We're particularly interested in hearing from people across government, particularly in the local and regional ecosystems, around what they think should and could be in the National Data Library. There's been a lot of debate and discussion around what that might look like. The Data Use and Access Bill, which is a pretty chunky piece of legislation, is going through this year, and that, I think, presents a really interesting opportunity at the intersection of industry and public sector for data to help transform public services. And of course, the AI Opportunities Action Plan, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later, is coming up. Just a final plug for some of our work. We have actually done a fairly systematic piece of research looking at opportunities for government data in AI systems, and I would encourage and welcome people looking at that. And last but not least, I want to quickly mention an initiative we're working on, again, which we're very much hoping we're going to get feedback and input from places like Government Digital Service, but also from across government. If you are looking to use your data in an AI system, consider some tools openly available through something called ML Commons, is a standard we're working on called Croissant, as in the croissant that you would eat. I believe that it was named at the point of someone having their breakfast, so that's why it's called that. But in essence, it is a tool set to do the three things I talked about a second ago, to help make it easier for people to prepare their data, make their data reusable for others, and ensure that they see data a bit like code. And you know, if data can be improved and made more accessible and more usable, that presents opportunities for everyone. You need a common format for the data, and if everyone's working to a common format and a common standard, that potentially makes it a lot easier for people to engage. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today.
That was incredibly interesting. Thank you very much, Stuart. And our final speaker today, I'm honoured to hand over to my esteemed colleague, Elena. I think we're going to get to the real heart of our conversation today and talk through some of the lessons that you've learned through your academic and industry career in terms of what makes AI projects succeed and fail. Without further ado.
Thank you very much. Despite AI promising a lot of opportunities and rising effectiveness in the public sector, we have observed that around 70% of AI use cases stall in POC phase. So let's have a look of what our meta-analysis results are showing. What are the major challenges? So the first one, surprisingly, is not the technical issue or data issue, how we hypothesized in the beginning. So the major challenge appeared to be happening in a lot of projects is actual lack of ownership and leadership. So for the POC phase, quite a lot of projects are assigned and conducted by a group of enthusiasts. But then at the end, when the project is needed to be put into production, there is no responsible person who would be conducting this or who would be leading this project. Because quite often in public sector, these leadership roles are assigned additionally to the major role, so the person just doesn't have time for that. So the second challenge that we have identified in our meta-analysis of over 4,000 use cases is the misexpectations for a return of investments. What I mean here is quite often there is a promise of AI being like increasing effectiveness, saving costs and time in routine tasks. However, when we just say that we will save with implementing this AI model or service, we will save time. Quite often we are not saying how much time we would say. So clear metrics and clear expectations would be really appreciated in upfront in such projects. And additional challenge connected with the previous one is quite often there are hidden budgetary restrictions that are associated with the AI services coming into production, because it's very exciting and very interesting to conduct POC projects when we need just to prove that the use case will be effective and that AI can bring us some tangible results. However, there is a problem with financing the production and associated costs, such as infrastructural costs, educational costs, and many more. The next challenge is what we have been talking, or my colleagues were talking about before. These are associated with data, regulations, and outdated infrastructure. So data quality is very essential for the successful AI implementation and production. Additionally, quite often what we've seen in our analysis is that data is quite often siloed in different places. So the AI model in production would not be able to access all of these data sets seamlessly. Additionally, there are quite some challenges associated with regulatory domain, especially in healthcare, where AI promises to make patients' life better and save time for the doctors, for example, for the data entry. But we can't bring it so fast to production, to the actual users, because of the regulatory challenges. And the last but not least, I think it's one of the most important ones, is the citizen adoption. So how do we make citizens, how do we show to the citizens that the AI tools are safe for them, that they would be trusting these solutions? Of course, there are a lot of potential challenges associated with the upskilling of the population, and also involving underserved communities or people who are lacking data and digital literacy into development of such solutions, so that they would be on board with this. Thank you, and I think if I would summarize this all, then we should see much more AI solutions that are ethical, that are following frameworks that would making these services transparent for the public.
Thank you very much to our panel. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Before we move on to the open discussion, I do just want to remind our audience today that we really welcome your questions in the web chat. Please do submit them and we will get our panel's responses back to you. I think where I'd like to start, and probably a question to all of you in turn, if I were a civil servant right now thinking about these huge issues, how do you build a government that can embrace AI? I would be thinking, where on earth do I start? So I suppose, feel free to answer that question directly, but it would be fascinating to hear from you examples across your work of where you've worked on a particularly interesting or successful project. If you're really brave, if you could talk about something that hasn't gone so well, that would also be really, really interesting. And I know, Jennifer, you mentioned a project earlier with the Department for Education, but if you'd like to kick off, that would be fantastic.
It's probably good to answer as myself, first of all, as well, though. So having the kind of same issues as everyone in, okay, where do I start? Like, what am I allowed to do? Like, there's all these amazing tools. Like, can I use them? Like, is that okay? And I think that's really been the kind of focus of the first kind of work that we've done in GDS, is just really simple things like, here are the tools that you will have access to. Like, here's a co-pilot in one of your different kind of software tools that you already have. These are things that you can do with it. And I think it's that moment of, we don't know how big we can kind of dream, and we don't know the art of the possible. So I think that is a lot of certainly where I'm kind of feeling like seeing people just around me, like creating amazing slide decks, or asking questions of things that they just don't know the answer to. Like, help me out to explain quantum to people. Like, wouldn't that be great? And then we're seeing that really successfully when we bring communities across government together. And that's a real focus for us, particularly has been in the data space, and we're trying to recreate that in the AI space as well, is when you bring people together just to create the conditions for sharing, they then start to see, oh, actually, like, here's best practice, or here's where somebody's doing it. And we've convened AI communities. We've talked with people in the kind of data security and security space around what do we need to consider, and what should we be sharing more broadly. So for me, it's that a lot of the kind of day-to-day efficiencies are about that kind of grassroots communities. I think there's also the other side of it, which is, how do we like create the space for citizens? Like, we talk about the time tax. How do we use AI to do some of those things? So if you are somebody who is building a digital service, where do you even start with AI? And I think that's where actually we should be looking to organisations such as Nortal and other big cloud providers to show us, okay, like, how do we change our thinking? What are the things we should be thinking about? And where in the private sector is this being done well, or where is this being done well elsewhere?
Really interesting, thank you. Stuart, I'll hand to you. I assume you've been involved in some of these communities that Jenny has mentioned, and just would be really interested to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, we have in some areas. I think we're lucky on one hand that we're not held to perhaps the same levels of scrutiny, because ultimately Jenny's responsible for an area that delivers digital services to citizens. So the scrutiny over those is massive. We have an angle that looks at civil servants who come to our training, and it's fantastic to hear that there's potentially twice as many going through the data and digital agenda, the DDAT framework, I think it's called, that's going to make so that it's fantastic that government's investing more in that. But there's also a long tail. I think there's about 500,000 civil servants who are deemed non-technical staff, and one of the things I'm observing is there's a real risk that they may be left behind, or not given the opportunities to think about how AI might add value to their work or to the services that they're kind of stewarding in their roles. And I think kind of resetting some of the skills frameworks in those areas is a real opportunity. And I know, in fact, Cabinet Office is looking to do that around the non-technical professions. But I would kind of observe that there's an opportunity to try and get people. I was at a panel yesterday that was discussing how might you reimagine public services, and someone came up with a useful analogy. They said, well, it's a bit like if you go into a forest at night. Traditionally, you would just imagine taking a flashlight or a torch with you, but now you could imagine taking a drone with you and launching it up into the sky, and it would illuminate the forest, and you would be able to see from above where you might be able to go to get through the forest. And I thought that was quite an interesting analogy. I mean, obviously, it's on one hand a bit extreme, because drones perhaps don't have the best connotations in a world that's moving to be much more defence-focused. But I think the principle is quite interesting. The principle is that you can think a bit differently, and giving everyone the knowledge, the literacy around AI. I mean, when it comes to data, we have a particular definition that was actually the great work of Jenny Tennyson, a former colleague of mine and former CEO of the ODI. She defined data as literacy as the ability to think and work critically with data. And the bit that I would add now that we're seeing is, and also to understand its role in society. So I think if anyone and everyone working in government sees the data they're working with, and then they look at the opportunities that may or may not be relevant to using those data with AI, that would be a great game-changing move. And I know Nortal's done work looking at all the use cases for AI in government, and we're delighted to be having the opportunity to work with them to go deeper on what the data sets are or should be that could help make those come about.
Thank you, Stuart. Yes, I'm really excited for that partnership to take hold. I think that leads really nicely onto you, Elena, and the 750 use cases. It'd be really fascinating to hear about your experience working with clients and how you enable them to get started with some of these really thorny issues.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say that the issues, the challenges that we have presented, these are very similar for the private sector and for the public sector. So it's not so, the public sector is not so different from here. And what I think that if we would actually shift focus a bit on the why question. So in any project where we want to build or implement some AI solution, we need to understand why and for whom we are doing it. In the public services, we're building digital services, proactive services for the citizens. So ultimate beneficiary is the citizen. And here are some challenges around it. That first of all is trust. What we have seen is that people tend to trust private companies more than public services. Service providers like private companies like Netflix and Amazon, and they're okay with sharing their data, very sensitive data sometimes, with these companies to get personalized services. So, and they actually expect these personalized, proactive services from the governments as well, so that they would not think that they need to apply to some benefit, let's say, and compensation, but the government would already think of that for me. And quite often, if we want to provide proactive services, there is an AI component associated with it. So we want to predict that the person would require such service. And there is an issue of trust. So that if people do not want to share their data, we cannot develop such proactive services. So the question is how to build trust with citizens. What we have observed that giving more transparency on how the data is used, when it's accessed, what is the purpose of access, and when person can go and audit these access points, then this develops a lot of trust.
It's such an interesting point, and Jenny, maybe I'll come back to you for this question. But as you were speaking, I was thinking, in order to build trust in the use of AI with citizens, how much do we think citizens should be aware that AI is part of the service? And I think would be really interested to hear how you're thinking about this in UK government at the moment. How much is it, we're bringing a cool, new, shiny AI tool for you to use, or how much is it more about just bringing really good quality public services where you don't even really think about the AI that's working behind the scenes?
I think it has to be a balance of both, because you absolutely want those kind of personalised services, but you are very aware as a citizen that I may give you information, but government is a big organisation. Like, am I giving it to this service? Am I giving it to like government more broadly?
Yeah.
And I think that's where the kind of issues happen. But you see great things happening in places like healthcare, where in terms of use of data and preserving that, you've got the National Data Guardian as a role. You've got the Caldecott principles and all of the Caldecott guardians. There's a huge amount of engagement as part of those programs, and that's what we are then kind of trying to bring more broadly into developing things like the data ethics framework that really is then embedded into our AI playbook to say, if you're using these, like, here are some principles, here are the things you need to think about right from the start. So in the same way we currently have cybersecurity, secure by design, that kind of sense of, okay, ethics by design, but you picked up a really good point. We've done some public attitudes survey recently on, okay, what would it look like to have better access to data? Actually, transparency is the thing that brings that kind of trust. And so we really need to embed that into the things that we do. And I think then it's, okay, how do you do that? How do you provide that transparency so that people can actually understand it as well? Because there's a very big difference between saying, yep, fill your boots, you can find out everything, but actually you can't understand what is happening in the process that my data is actually being used in. So I think there's a kind of transparency of the algorithms, there's transparency around how your data is being used, but also there's a transparency about how government works and what are the processes that you're dropping into. And I think all of those things are needed in order to kind of join up those services. And that's definitely something that GDS are looking at, is that kind of join up of public services.
So sticking to the UK context, there are some kind of very seismic changes happening at legislative level and policy level, and introductions of things like the National Data Library to be defined and determined over the coming months and years. I guess, Stuart, I'd be really interested to hear your perspective on how government is or could be getting this right as they move forward.
Well, I think government's been making great progress. I mean, you mentioned the Data Use and Access Bill. Embedded within that a number of provisions which are kind of relevant to what Elena was talking about with regards to government stepping closer towards that kind of recommendation style engine we take for granted from our platform service providers, whether they be shopping services or services we consume media from. Those include things like, I mean, people may have thought this was just the case, but birth and death registers in the UK are not digital by default. You know, making those digital by default will mean, hopefully in the future, if unfortunately someone in your family dies, maybe the government would then alert you to services that could help you. Equally, if you have someone born in your family, a much more joyous event, then you might get further recommended services that could help you. I mean, that type of personalisation would be great. However, I think to get there, we need to have citizens trusting government more. And unfortunately, it doesn't help that we've had scandals like the Post Office, where some embedded, entrenched suppliers for a long time have eroded that trust. And when it comes to health, an area I know that you've got a lot of experience of working inside government and outside, there's a lot to be done there. There are some leading flagship projects like Open Safely in Oxford, Ben Goldacre's project, that through the perils of COVID has shown that you can do amazing things with 50 million plus patient records and protect the sensitivity and privacy of those patients. So I think there are some good markers out there. I'm excited about the legislation and I'm delighted to see the work that GDS is doing.
Well, Eleanor, I definitely have to bring you in here to talk a little bit about an international perspective, given I think so much of what Stuart has talked to there is live in Estonia. So yeah, please do tell us a bit about your work here.
There are examples of solving such issues with being more proactive in citizen services. In Estonia, we have a set of registries. Data is interoperable, and citizens are getting their benefits, let's say parental benefits for the newborns. People don't need to apply for that. They will receive such benefits based on the life events recorded in the registries. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Amazing. I think we're about at time, but I definitely want to conclude this fascinating conversation with just a very short and snappy response from each of you on what you would say is the key thing you'd like our audience to take away from this discussion on AI at the heart of government. And Jennifer, go first.
I think it's very much around, back to kind of stealing your point there, around like AI and data go hand in hand. And understanding if you are an owner of a data set, if your organization owns that, like how do you kind of change the culture, change the literacy, change the understanding so that you start to treat that as an asset. But equally, if you want to make use of AI, just starting to make it part of your everyday life, taking away that kind of barrier of just like worrying about it, like find in your organization how you can do that, and also find the AI playbook and other things that we can help and support with.
Stuart.
Treat data as critical infrastructure. Just as government talks about the railways, the roads, the hospitals, certain registries should be seen as critical data infrastructure. Certain bits of data that, whether they're about us or about services we might want or need to access, they should be seen and treated as critical data infrastructure. And as a closing point, there was a recent index on the happiest countries in the world. And I think the happiest country in the world supposedly is Finland. And apparently one of the reasons that people in Finland are very happy is they trust their institutions. And I think if the UK could lead with making data more trusted in certain areas of society, then that would mean that AI could be used more responsibly, and it might improve citizen services and perhaps help us catch up with Estonia.
And on that
Absolutely.
That was never going to happen. But
Oh, it will. It can. And Elena, finally.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that trust is one of the key issues. If we want to bring AI for the public good, then people need to trust the systems, the services. And of course, we can learn from the examples that have been already implemented, and both negative and positive examples. I guess this would bring us new knowledge and understanding how we can tweak the processes in order to do AI implementation successful.
Thank you very much to our panel for joining us today, and thanks very much for tuning in. Please do give us a follow at Nortal, the Open Data Institute, and indeed the Government Digital Service. And we look forward to reading and answering your questions. See you next time.